Today, we're going to talk about the path to cloud security certification. My name's Dwayne Natwick. I am a cloud training architect lead here at Confidentiality. I am a Microsoft certified trainer and a regional lead for that program. I'm also a Microsoft MVP with multiple certifications, as well as not just in Microsoft, but also the ISC2 CISSP certification. You can reach out to me. Happy to answer any of your questions that you may have. Feel free to connect with me on social media at the links provided on this slide. So today we're going to go through how you're going to think about planning a secure environment, just to kind of give some security background to all of this. And then we're going to build from that into building a career path around security, compliance, and identity within the Microsoft certifications that are available. Microsoft has recently announced a new set of security, compliance, and identity certifications. So we're going to go through each one of those, as well as the ones that were available previously in terms of the Azure Security Engineer and the Microsoft 365 Security Administrator Associate certifications. So we're going to talk through all of those and what the objectives of each of those are, and what I recommend is a good path to take to determine to take a path in certification for Microsoft 365 or Azure cloud security practices. So to kind of set a foundation around each of these certifications, it's important to kind of think about what builds and how you plan a secure environment. So we're going to go through some typical things around security right now. The first of which is understanding the types of threats. And there are multiple types of threats, and depending on how you are planning and administering those threats, you are dealing with them in different ways. And the key thing here is to understand that we know and understand external threats, but understand our internal threats as well. And many of our internal threats are based on shadow IT or elevated privileges, perimeter threats based on identity and things like that. When we talk about external threats, we're talking about exploiting loopholes and exploiting potential vulnerabilities within our environment, or stopping our use within our environment completely with denial of service attacks. But a lot of attacks are vulnerability exploits or brute force type attacks, injection attacks, spoofing, identity spoofing attacks, as well as more malicious attacks that are trying to gain information and gain data out of your network, mostly around personal information or financial information that might do damage to your organization. And if you look at the link down here at the bottom, the OWASP Project Top 10 generally provides a list of those top 10 external threats that are taking place year over year. To address those threats, both internal and external, we need to build a security posture. And how do we best build a security posture? That's through defense in depth. And when we talk about defense in depth, we talk about how we are protecting ourselves at various levels within our organization and within our security controls to decrease the amount of vulnerabilities and eliminate threats as best as we can. And within cloud environments, we don't worry so much anymore about the physical security unless we're in a hybrid type cloud environment where we still have our own data centers. But generally, the physical security piece within a Microsoft cloud environment, both with Microsoft 365 as well as Azure, is handled by Microsoft. They own the buildings, they own all of the hardware, the access to those buildings, and all the surveillance and all of those security components all fall on Microsoft. So our first and most important piece to protecting our environment within Microsoft's ecosystem is identity and access. And we'll talk more about how we can learn more about that within the security certifications that Microsoft has. But we have been, as cloud technologies have become more and more prominent, we've started these sayings of identity is the new perimeter, or identity is the new control plane, and it really truly is. And keeping our identities protected, and making sure that the people that have access to our network are those that require access to our network and what they are authorized to access, and then verifying that they are who they say they are is an incredible is a very large task that needs to take place within our environment. So we need to think about that. And as we go through these certifications here in the next few minutes, you will see that identity and access plays a key role in just about every one of these certifications and every one of the discussions that take place within these different certification roles. The other pieces here then are perimeter and network security, how we're protecting our virtual perimeter with firewalls and security groups and different access rules within our network is really where perimeter and network security take place. We have our compute, which is our our databases, our virtual machines. All of those fall into the compute. Everything, our containers, how we're protecting those and protecting what is taking place within our operating systems. Our applications, we start now talking about APIs and how we're protecting connections and service endpoints and things to our applications, which ultimately then gets to our data and how we're protecting our data. We're going to continue as we go through this presentation within each one of these certifications, discuss which areas of this defense in depth approach does each of these certifications cover within the services that are within the objective areas of these certifications. So that's why discussing this and going through and understanding our defense in depth approach within our Microsoft ecosystem is really important as we guide through each of the certifications that are available to you. And when we talk about security and we talk about our cloud environment, we talk about shared responsibility. And again, each of these areas around the defense in depth, there's different responsibilities to it depending on what they are. Azure generally handles services within the infrastructure as a service and the platform as a service areas, where Microsoft 365 is considered a software as a service subscription-based model. So you look at each of these and there's different areas of security responsibilities that you have. And as you go from infrastructure as a service to the right to software as a service, Microsoft takes on much more of that responsibility, but we still have all of these controls and everything that we need to be responsible for, and we need to understand within each. And we'll talk again, these all are covered in one way or another as we talk through our security certifications. And finally, before we actually get into the certifications and building a security path, we want to talk about Microsoft's zero trust model. And as we talk through identity as the new control plane, the zero trust model becomes very important in terms of how we think about what a user that is trying to access our network needs to do to verify their identity. And what zero trust model does is it assumes that every access request is a breach, and we verify that request so that we know where it originates from. And we'll talk more about this at a high level, but zero trust falls along the entire range of identity and access within an organization. So let's talk now about building a career path in security, compliance, and identity. So as I've stated, Microsoft has rolled out a number of new certifications within their overall role-based certification platform. They have a couple of legacy ones that are very broad-based around Microsoft 365 as well as Azure. They are the Microsoft 365 Security Administrator Associate and the Azure Security Engineer Associate. Then there are these 4 new exams. One of them is a great fundamentals exam for security, compliance, and identity fundamentals that covers both Azure and Microsoft 365 brought together in terms of the security services that are utilized. It's the first certification that really has covered both of these, and we'll get a little bit deeper into the objective areas of each. Then we have these 3 other associate level certifications. The SC 300 is the Identity and Access Associate exam. The SC 400 is the Information Protection Associate exam, and then the final one is the SC 200, which is the Security Operation Analyst Associate certification. So each of these take many of the services that are part of the MS 500 and the AZ 500 and really take and go to a specialization level of each. So as you're thinking about what your path is going to be, as I always recommend, is that you start with the SC 900 certification, which is, the 900 level certifications, the fundamental certifications give you really that broad brush of all the security, of all the services within that area, and in this case, the security, compliance, and identity. From there, you can then determine which path you're going to take. Is it, and we'll talk more about each of these paths here in the next slides and in the following sections. But if we're looking at, we want to head down the Microsoft 365 path, we might go to the MS 500, which is a very broad based exam in its own around all Microsoft 365 security services. Then we might go from there into maybe one of these specialization areas. Same with the Azure Security Engineer. We may feel that we are more comfortable with the Azure environment, but from there we might see we want to get more into identity and access, or maybe into the operations analyst side of things. And really the AZ 500 can help us down that path as well. The one that's really very Microsoft 365 focused would be the information protection certification, which really, if you're an Azure person, probably isn't something that would be down your path, but it definitely, if you're Microsoft 365, would be something very much of interest of yours. And as I stated, depending on your goals, you can then determine which direction you want to go. Are you a Microsoft 365 or modern workplace specialist? Are you an Azure specialist? Do you specify specifically around identity and access or information protection, or are you somebody that really likes the hunting and investigating of potential threats and vulnerabilities? And that's really where security operations comes in. And we'll talk about each one of these now coming up. So let's start with the Security, Compliance, and Identity Fundamentals, or the SC 900 exam. The SC 900 exam is made up of 4 key areas. You can see that it does hit the base concepts of security, compliance, and identity, which more or less are those concepts that we covered here in the first section of this presentation, where we were talking about defense in depth strategies and shared responsibilities and zero trust models. That all falls into those key concepts that make up that 5 to 10%. And then we have 3 other areas here where we talk about, we'll see identity and access management, security solutions, which really hits a lot of the Azure area as well, and then the compliance solutions. So within the compliance solutions, we're looking at both Azure and Microsoft 365, where we're looking at the compliance manager and the compliance portal within Microsoft 365, and we're talking about Azure Security Center and Azure Policy and Azure Sentinel within the Azure environment. And when we're thinking about our security posture, and we come back to this defense in depth slide, we really are covering every area of this security posture, with the exception of the physical security piece, and all the services that go along the lines of that entire set of our defense in depth approach. At a very high level, it's a fundamentals exam, so it doesn't get really deep in each of these services, but gives you that broad brush, and and hopefully you find from your preparation for this exam a place that you feel the most comfortable and the most energized about to move forward from there. And then your next exam that we're going to cover is the MS 500, which is the Microsoft 365 Security Administrator Associate. And as I said when we were talking about the roadmap, the MS 500 is a very broad exam around all of the security services around Microsoft 365. When this class is provided, it's a 5-day class because of all the information that goes into that. And you can see just about every one of the objective areas are very balanced in terms of how they're weighted within the exam area as well, with of course identity and access management being the highest weighted by a few points over the other ones, strictly because it is such an important piece, and identity and access falls all along the lines of threat protection and information protection and governance and compliance as well. So even though identity and access is a specific piece of the objective area and of the learning areas of Microsoft 365 security, it is something that perpetuates throughout all of the other areas as well. And we also look at implementing and managed threat protection, information protection, and then also the different governance and compliance features, again, in Microsoft 365, which also, like I said, refer back again into those fundamentals areas also. And when we think about the security posture and think about the defense in depth, here we're looking at identity and access, we're looking at different applications and data that are being protected. A little bit in terms of compute, because when we start talking about hybrid services, we talk about applications that are maybe on virtual machines on premises. So we have some areas there when we're talking about hybrid identity and application registration and application proxies and things like that take place, and protection of our Active Directory servers that might be on premises in a hybrid environment as well. But mostly we're talking about identity and access, our applications and data, both cloud and on premises applications fall into that realm as well. The Azure AZ 500 exam is a very Azure specific exam. It does not really go into Microsoft 365 at all, with the exception of maybe when we think about Azure Sentinel and connecting to different services within the entire Microsoft ecosystem, as well as hybrid ecosystems. When we talk about the AZ 500 exam, again, you can note here that manage identity and access is again a 30 to 35% weighted part of this exam. So as it is with MS 500, it's about 30% of that exam is around identity and access management, and that's both working with Azure Active Directory, working with a hybrid identity with an on-premises Active Directory server, and how we are managing and protecting our users. Again, with that zero trust model, we want to take into account what that a user is who they say they are before they're given access to any information within our environment. And so again, generally when teaching this class, it takes a good day or more to talk about identity and access within the Azure environment or the Azure Active Directory environment. Then we get into more of the platform protection and protecting our compute services, managing security operations, and then securing data and applications. So working with our data, our storage accounts, our policies, procedures, our logs and monitoring files and metrics, and how then we're securing also our data, our storage accounts, our applications, all of our APIs. And back to our security, our defense in depth approach, we look at then all of our services, and again, this covers really every layer of that defense in depth strategy, from identity and access all the way through to data. Because when we're talking about Azure, we are talking about all of our services and how they are protected, and a lot of these might be infrastructure as a service, virtual machines, or platform services that aren't at that software user subscription level like SaaS services are. And these are some of the services that we talk about and think about when we're talking about security posture and our defense in depth within an Azure environment, such as the role-based access control, our firewall and port rules, our virtual networks and network security groups, and APIs and encryption and classification, monitoring. All of those go into this Azure Security Engineer exam. We also get into security and compliance within the environment. As we talk through our security and compliance within the Azure environment, we talk about policies and compliance and regulatory standards and controls, and reviewing our typology and traffic and things like that within the network. So we continue to look at all of those, and we study those as part of the exam preparation as we prepare to take the AZ 500 exam. SC 300 is our Identity and Access Administrator Associate exam. So this is one of the new exams that's now a specialized type exam. Now, whether you are an Azure person or whether you are a Microsoft 365 person, I recommend the SC 300 exam, because as I stated, identity is the new control plane, identity is the new perimeter. Any one of the buzzwords that you want to take into account here is something to think about when we are thinking about our SC 300 exam. And if you have a passion for or a wealth of knowledge around identity and access, if you're a legacy on Active Directory server person that wants to understand the cloud, SC 300 definitely is something that I would definitely recommend you add this to part of your security and compliance certification roadmap. Within this one, again, this one is wholly focused on identity and access management. So we're talking through, and each one of these are weighted pretty much the same in terms of what we're looking at here. We're looking at the identity management solution. We're looking at authentication and access manager. We're looking at access management for applications. We're looking at identity governance and strategy. So we're looking at a holistic approach to identity from the user, admin, and then all the way down to the app level of who's accessing what applications might be accessing what, and how we are governing and complying to what needs to take place within our identity strategy. And again, this one is specific, very specific just to that identity and access approach. It gets a little bit to applications around maybe application proxies and app registrations within Azure Active Directory, but it's not a large component to this. It's really identity and access is really what we're focusing on with this certification and this exam. There is, when we think about identity management, we think about things like role-based access control, multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and conditional access policies, which also kind of brings in some of that application piece. And then privileged identity management, how we're managing escalated privileges and what users and user applications are required. And it brings us right into that zero trust model. The zero trust model becomes a area of focus to this exam and how we are utilizing that zero trust model. And that zero trust model is one where we look at, you know, the privileges of the network, the risks of the users, the location of the users, the devices, the applications that they're accessing. And we look at all of that and how we are going to verify who is requesting that information and that it originates from who we expected it to. The next one of these specialty exams is the SC400, which is the Microsoft Information Protection Administrator Associate exam. And this one, like the Identity and Access exam, this one is very specific around just information protection. If it's spread along information protection policies, data loss prevention policies, and information governance. We're talking about sensitivity labels. We're talking about classifying your data. We're talking about making sure that sensitive data isn't being emailed outside of your organization. Who has access to that information within your organization, whether it's guests or within your or people that are part of your organization. How are we protecting and retaining our information for what's required in terms of regulatory standards, corporate company standards, and things like that. So we are looking through every one of these, and we are taking each one of these into account at a very methodical level, where we are making sure that we understand each one of these objective areas to their fullest extent. These areas are all part of the MS 500 exam as well, but they are but this exam takes it, expands it out to a much more deeper set, where you need to really understand how you're going to govern over your information and protect your information, classify your information, and all of those things. So keep that in mind when you're going through and you're thinking about which direction you want to head. Are you a data person that that wants to protect information within your organization and maintain compliance to that information within your organization? Then this might be the exam for you. And this really focuses all around the protection of data, and it might be how we're protecting data within applications, but it really is focused specifically on your data and how you are governing and protecting data within email, SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Teams, how all that data is being shared and being protected and being classified properly. And what we're really dealing with here is that we need to understand when we're talking about sharing of data is we're talking about the data accessibility and availability, how it's being accessed from and potentially from multiple sources, that it's available when it's needed, but it's secured from unauthorized access, and that we are keeping it keeping the confidentiality, integrity, and compliance of that information, that we identify that sensitive data properly. We keep our data confidential to only those that are authorized to view it. We're maintaining that it's accurate and that it's not been compromised. So that's the integrity piece here. And then we're monitoring the compliance to different security and regulatory standards, depending on, privacy requirements, and making sure that PII and PHI, the protected information is not leaking out of our organization and getting into the wrong hands of bad actors. And then the final exam to speak about is the SC200 exam, the Microsoft Security Operations Analyst Associate exam. Now, where I really covered within the SC300 and the SC400 how it was really expanded from some of the content that's both in the MS 500 and the AZ 500 exam. The SC200 exam is completely new material for most people that are not that have not been working within like log analytics and within Azure Sentinel for and working with security logs and things of that nature. This is truly a operations-based exam that really covers a lot of material around doing queries and hunting and investigating threats within your organization, finding potential threats, identifying vulnerabilities before they happen. It's really, there's really no baseline of where of materials that that Microsoft took and built from, with the exception of just Azure Sentinel in general, which is a very general topic and very light topic on AZ500. It's really taking this a step further. And if we look at it here and look at what's required, what the objective areas of, you can see mitigating threats using Azure Sentinel is almost half of the exam. And that is around looking at, like I said, hunting and utilizing log analytics and Custo queries to identify and find and hunt threats within the Azure Sentinel SIEM environment. It also does cover many of the things around Microsoft 365 and Azure Defender. Azure Defender being a piece to the Azure Security Center portfolio, and how it can help you to identify, again, threats and vulnerabilities within the Azure environment, and then the Microsoft 365 Defender. So it brings together both, again, the Azure and the Microsoft 365 environments to an operations level of protecting ourselves against potential threats and identifying our vulnerabilities based on where our controls lie, based on what is taking place within our network. And it's built around, many of these services are built around the cognitive services and machine learning capabilities that are built within Microsoft's machine learning services as well. And this really gets into then that compute applications and data piece of things. We're protecting our data. It has a little bit of identity and access piece to it too, because Azure Sentinel and queries might be about, breaches of identity, but it's really about protecting those components of our compute applications and data, and making sure that there is no information that is being accessed that should not be accessed within our information. And if it is, we're hunting and we're analyzing and we're trying to find it before it perpetuates itself throughout our network. And just to talk about Azure Sentinel a little bit, and just so everybody understands a little bit about Azure Sentinel, if they're not familiar, what Azure Sentinel is Microsoft's SIEM and SOAR solution, which is a security information event management system, as well as a security orchestrated automated response system as well. So not only does it collect data and utilize that data for finding vulnerabilities within our environment and finding threats, but it also has, as I stated, with the machine learning capabilities within Microsoft, the ability to find specific anomalies and potentially automate response around that, and identify areas to investigate and assign incidents to based on potential threats and what is being seen as anomalous behavior within our environment. So now you have learned about each of the different certifications. Let's take a look at what you can do and how you can maybe prepare yourself for these certifications. And the best and first place to always go to is Microsoft Learn. And if you just go to microsoft.com/learn, or just keyword Microsoft Learn within your favorite search engine, you can very easily find Microsoft Learn, and then you can browse to the different exams and certifications. I've already gone to the certification area, and I can very easily right in here find those SC exams by just doing SC. If I'm looking for something that's security specific, I can type security, and you can see I have popped up my my AZ 500s here, my MS 500, and those other exams are here as well. So if I go in to say the SC 900 exam, what you can find in every one of these, if you go to the particular exam, is a learning path for each of them. And this is the best first place to prepare yourself. I recommend before you take some of the associate level exams to potentially take a instructor-led course like what Opsagility we provide here at Opsagility, and that can help reinforce and allow you to interact with an instructor around labs and just questions around the materials. But a good first place to start is always Microsoft Learn. Microsoft Learn has done a lot to build great content within for each of these exams. I have found that the content that was built up to these exams being released in beta is probably the best that I've seen. So definitely recommend you utilizing Microsoft Learn as a first step to gaining your certification. If we go into, let's go into the SC 200. So you can see that SC 900 had 4 modules to it. The SC 200 you can see has 8. So there's quite a bit more to learn within SC 200 than there is for fundamentals, which is to be expected. And you can see many of these are around Azure Sentinel and Custo query language. So of those 8 modules, we have 4 modules that are part, or 5 modules that are part of Azure Sentinel. We have then one on Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft 365 Defender, and Azure Defender. So it helps to look at these learning paths to understand what to expect on these exams, even what areas might be important to these exams, and you can then go through each one of these and learn a little bit, learn about them very easily around what you need to do to prepare for the exam. So to wrap things up, and some things to think about here is like I said, start with the fundamentals. It's always good for any exam path to work towards taking the fundamentals exam. The fundamentals exams are generally less expensive than the associate level exams. So you can, if you've never taken a Microsoft exam, you can get potentially get a certification, as well as it costs about only about fraction of what the associate exam costs. Once you've gone through the fundamentals, then pick which path you want to take. Was Azure, the area that you felt the most drawn to? Was it modern workplace? Was it specific to a specific area like identity and access management or information protection, or the operations piece? Do you like hunting and looking for threats? Those are the things to look at. Then pick your study method. Do you prefer Microsoft just reading on Microsoft Learn, live instructor-led training, or maybe there's on-demand training that you want to do? I always recommend, though, no matter which path you take, get some hands-on. Find a way, get a trial subscription around Microsoft 365 or Azure, so that you can get into those environments and look at those environments as you prepare for the exam. It's much better to understand as you click around and go through some of these portals, especially when you think about Microsoft 365. There are many different administrative portals that you can go through and utilize for different things, different capabilities within there. And you really need to understand all of them and where you go for each as you prepare for the exam. So to summarize, we talked about just the foundations of building and planning a secure environment, how to build a career path in security, compliance, and identity, and what you might want to do in terms of which direction. And then we went through each one of the exams: the SC 900, the fundamentals exam for security, compliance, and identity, the Azure Security Engineer Associate exam, the Microsoft 365 Security Associate Admin Associate exam, and then the new exams of the SC 300, 400, and 200 that cover Microsoft Identity and Access Administration, Microsoft Information Protection Administration, and Security Operations Analysis. So each one of these are great exams to have in their own right, but I recommend you take a path. You take a few. You take a You find a direction. You take the fundamentals. You take one of either the Microsoft or the Azure 500 exam, and then determine from there which direction you might take in terms of the 300, the 400, the 200 exam. Thank you very much for attending this certification talk on security, compliance, and identity certifications. My name is Dwayne Natwick. Have a great day.